Good morning still, I guess, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's coffee talk. Let me make sure I've got this recorded. It's going so good. As Jason mentioned, it's Team Beard here today at Quick Rate. So
that's right. I didn't think about that.
Few more folks on the call today. But again, thank you all very much for joining in today. My name is Sean Bryan, the president of Quick Rate. I'm going to let the other three gentlemen introduce themselves. Steve, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. I'm Steve Huntington, Director of Analytics here. I've been spent my entire career working with community financial institutions and everything from strategic planning, valuation, M&A work, capital planning, and model building. And I've been working with Sean and Jason and David here for about a little over a decade or so at Quick Rate.
Great. Jason, if you want to go next.
Yeah, Jason, sales associate here, working with a lot of you guys. So y'all know me, love working with y'all. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Jason. David?
Hi, everyone. David Surrey. I have been with Quick Rate for the last 17 years. Worked with a lot of your credit unions over the last couple of years, and looking forward to today.
Great. Thank you all very much. Glad to have everybody on the call. So today, much like in many of these previous coffee talks, we want to share some information, just again, what's new, where we're trying to improve and enhance. But knowing we're here, close to the call report deadline, we asked David and Jason to join us today, along with Steve, where we really just, we always want to focus on your questions, but we certainly wanted to, try to address as many of those from each of you, and then as many different perspectives as we can. So certainly use the Q&A box, use the chat. We'll be monitoring those and, trying to get to all of your questions. If we should not get to everyone, rest assured, we'll have a record of those. We'll put those into a document with responses. And so, our hope is that, not only the questions we cover from the slide deck today, but anything you have, if we don't touch them, we'll make those available along with a link to the recording, early next week. So, again, please submit everything you want. We'll again, either address them in today's call or, provide a written response, early next week. So that's kind of the format that we'll use today. So just first off, as we often do, Steve, just want to talk about any of the new enhancements that have been released.
Yeah. So we sent everyone should have got an email about a week ago or a few days ago, and we added a couple new enhancements to the tool, and both of these were based pretty much completely on feedback that we've gotten from users using the tool over the time. When we did our update to the layout of the ACL calculations last month, right, where we kind of reorganized the tool to make sure it's following the exact line items and accounting entries that we all need to deal with now that we're living in a CECL world. We got some feedback that people would like to see kind of a new summary page. We had a summary loan portfolio page, and the more we added to it, the more bells and whistles it sort of got, and so it got a little beefier. And so we thought it'd be a good idea to add a new little summary tab, which just had some of the most critical metrics about your CECL reserve, all on one little screen, and a couple visuals to track the trends as well. And I'll show that to you guys on my screen in just a second. And then also an enhancement we've been considering for a while has been on the books, but we finally have been able to come out with it. It gives additional flexibility in determining our look back period. So additional flexibility in what historical data do we think most helps us reflect what we think losses are going to be like in the future. And again, both of these enhancements are sort of, if you like the way the tool's working and you don't think that they're value added for you, you do not have to utilize them. The look back periods and the warrants will still work exactly as they always have, but there's some additional flexibility and functionality if you choose to use it. So I think now would be the time, Sean, for just a second for me to share my screen so I can just touch base on those for a minute.
Yes,
let's see.
You should have the ability.
All right, screen share. Here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
So our original homepage was the what we called our summary tab is the loan portfolio summary, right? This tab really focuses just on the loan portfolio, not the securities portfolio, not the unfunded commitments. So now we have a new tab as of this past week, Monday, I believe, which shows simply, hey, this is the output of the tool. This is the ACL that's calculated on the loan portfolio, on the securities portfolio, and on the unfunded commitments portfolio, and versus their balances at that time. So this kind of gives you a quick overview of the three different elements of CECL. And this is just a simple sum of those. This is similar to that kind of total CECL impact value. It's not identical, but very similar to the total CECL impact value that we had on the tool before. This is not helpful from an accounting entry standpoint, but it is helpful from just a conceptual standpoint. So we brought that back in here. And this would just be your most recent historical period, whether it was a month ago or a quarter ago. By default, this is going to be the second to last call report, right? The second to most recent call report value. So the previous quarter. If you were doing this on a monthly basis and you wanted to compare your values in this scenario to your values from a scenario you did 1 month ago, you could just say, hey, this is as of these values. I want to use 11/30/22, and then I can override these and type in the values from my scenario a month ago so that you can do a month-to-month comparison. And then just a couple summary charts down here to help visualize those ACL trends over time. 5 years worth, 6 years worth, or 6 quarters worth of your and your peer group's trend in ACL values. I think this kind of helps round out what we'd consider an executive summary package if you're sharing it with your board. The other enhancement is on the historical analysis tab. This is where we dig into the nitty-gritty of what your historical loss experience looks like in the different segments of your portfolio. And if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, what we'll see is there's a couple new columns here. Again, if you don't want to utilize any of this additional functionality, don't worry about it. It'll still do everything it always has, exactly the same way as it always has. But now we had a lot of users who said, listen, I want to use a longer look back period than my warm, right? The tool,
Steve,
for simplicity's sake.
Steve, come up for a second. Dave,
Yes.
Sean, Sean, mute your, can you try muting real quick? Let's see if that clears up. I think we're getting some kind of reverb here.
I hear the reverb too. I don't think it's coming from my end, but I can switch microphones again. That shouldn't be it though. Let's see.
And Dave, can you mute yours?
Oh, yeah.
Let's see if that helps. All right, go Steve. Let's see if that fixes it.
All right. So we had users coming, historically what our tool does for math's sake and for simplicity's sake, if you have a 3-year warm, we're going to use a 3-year look back period. You can use any 3-year look back period you want, but we match the duration of a look back period to the warm, right? There are certain circumstances where you say, well, listen, I've got, a 5-year warm on my mortgage portfolio, but I'd like to use 10 years worth of historical data. I know I'll have to do some extra math to make it make sense, but I'd like to do that. And this is the solution for that. And on the opposite end too, if you have a very short duration on, let's say, a portfolio of construction loans, but you want to use a longer time period, then you can do that as well. So let's say for our mortgage portfolio, let's say we have a 5-year warm. So our tool by default is going to do what it always does. It's going to give you 5 years worth of look back, right? It's going to calculate 5 years worth of aggregate losses, lifetime losses on this segment. But what if you said, well, I want to use 10 years of data to get my 5-year calculation? You can come here now to the look back period and you can change just the beginning or just the end of a look back period. So you can make the look back period any length of time you want, separate from the warm if you so desire. So let's say we want a 10-year look back period. We're going to go back to the first quarter of 2013. And so what we see happen is, all right, now we're using 10 years worth of historical data now, but we still have a 5-year warm. So whatever this 10-year aggregate look back loss rate is of 33 basis points, well, that's 10 years worth of losses. We want 5 years worth of losses, right? So we apply a multiplier. Hey, this is a multiplier, 0.5. And so we take that 10-year aggregate loss rate, multiply it by 0.5, and you get a 17 basis point or half that lifetime loss rate. So again, this is just if you want to take into account different swaths of historical time while still getting an accurate calculation based upon your warm, you have additional flexibility here that you did not have before. But it still works by default as it always has. Any follow-up questions specifically on that from David or Jason or anyone
So yeah,
on the
so
board?
one did come up here, Steve, and just hey, why, you know, if you're using the warm, why would you want to use a different look back other than your warm?
Well, so that's a good question. I think by default, we want to, it makes it's the simplest explanation and simplest way to go about it. However, if you're getting pushback from an examiner or an auditor saying, well, all right, you have a very short warm here. You've only got a 1 year remaining life, but so now you're only taking into account 1 year of history. I'd like you to take into account what happened in 2011, 12, and 13. You know, I'd like you to take into account multiple years worth of your historical experience, even though you're only calculating 1 year worth of losses going forward, or 1.5 years worth of losses going forward.
Yeah.
And it's certainly a valid argument. It makes the tool have to do additional math to get there. And but now you have that as an option. You might also want to exclude let's say you had a loss from a year and a half ago that was very out of the ordinary. Maybe it was a fraud situation or something very non-recurring, which has a huge impact on your historical loss calculations. And you're trying to find a way to kind of exclude that loss. You're not wiping it from history, but you don't think it's indicative of what you want to see moving forward. And you don't want to, but you don't feel like making a Q factor adjustment for it. You kind of want to get it out of the historical time frame. You now have some more flexibility to choose different look back periods of different durations, still calculate an accurate lifetime loss rate based upon your warm. So it's just for additional flexibility. I can come up with a handful of reasons. If you're a newer institution, right? If you're a de novo institution that hasn't been around very long, let's say you only have 6 years worth of loan data and you've got a 8-year warm on your mortgage portfolio right now. Well, historically, the tool would have a limitation on how it would calculate that lifetime loss rate because you couldn't choose, say, a 2-year look back period for a 6-year warm. Even if the data didn't exist, it was challenging. So now we have more flexibility for more unique situations and situations like that. It's a good question.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember, and Jason, that you did it's kind of the same explanation in the chat, but just for those who didn't see it in there, right? I mean, I think the tool's designed the way it is, and it's perfectly acceptable to continue to do that.
Yeah.
However, with a large number of people, as we have here today, and just with our customer base, right, we have different expectations of how you want to handle reserve, right? Some want to be as conservative as possible. Others don't want to put a penny more than they have to. But for those who want to be more conservative, particularly as Jason mentioned to the chat, if over the past few years you really haven't seen much by the way of net charge-off activity, well, then this gives you the opportunity to bring into a longer economic cycle or a longer period to consider losses, even though we're going to focus still on the same warm period. So it's just a level of flexibility that we had received as requests from users that, again, perfectly, perfect to just keep using the tool as the way it is. But if you just wanted to add a little, degree of flexibility or incorporate maybe losses in a period where you haven't seen any, this just gives you the ability to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what I'm doing what I did right here is just simply make by default, I set a common look back, meaning I now am saying, hey, I'm going to use 10 years worth of my loss experience across the board, even though I have, let's say, obviously these warms are not updated. They're just default values of 3 years. So this is a situation where you're using 10 years worth of historical trends to calculate a 3-year loss rate. And so obviously your multiplier here would be 30, well, except for that one, which I modified, 0.3 across the board. Just allows you to take into account more of an economic cycle in your historical context while still accurately calculating lifetime loss rate. Again, something you might want to do if you're trying to be more conservative and you had more losses further back in history.
I did have one question, Steve. Back on the summary tab, the new one.
Sure.
What periods does that, where is it drawing on if you go back there, it says last period 11/30.
I just typed that in just now.
Okay.
So it was by default, it was 9/30/22, which is, so by default, it's going to look at your, I have to type it in correctly. 09/30
And will
Um,
it pull those numbers then from 930? Because I had someone ask me, they're like, hey, it looks like I have 930 and 12, but what happened to my
That's
10 and
correct.
11?
So by default, it pulls again. So
MRQ.
right now, the tool is
Or
set up at
reverse.
12/31. Since we don't have the 3/31 call report data, that'll be shifted to 3/31 in about a week and a half or so, once those call reports are done coming in. But as of today, if I was running this tool by default and doing something as of 12/31, my current period would be 12/31. And so all these values here are results of the tool. They're outputs, right? If I go to the loan portfolio, let's say this scenario is as of 12/31. This is my reserve, right? 8951, and my balance is 1247. So on the summary, there's my 8951 and my 1247. And then this is just the most recent call report period before that. So the call report period before fourth quarter is third quarter. So here by default is third quarter. So by default, it's always going to pull that call report value from the previous call report. If you want to change it, you just got to plug these guys in. Let's say if you want this to be from your last scenario that you ran a month ago, that maybe still isn't in a call report yet. So that's the trick, is the tool has to have enough flexibility to be able to pull from the call reports when the call report is the value you want to use. But if it's not filed yet, or you're doing it monthly, you need to be able to type in your own values so that you can get an accurate comparison here. So you can, again, just like with other parts, plug in any manual date you want and then override these to be as of that date. Let's say a scenario you ran a month ago, you can pull up that scenario real quick. Let's say you pull up last month's scenario, just grab these numbers, come back to this scenario and plug them in, and then you get an accurate comparison, or period over period change. So it's kind of up to the user to decide what they want that last period to be, so they have a comparison that they like. But we wanted to have some default values in here, so we're using that last older call report.
Okay, great. All right, Steve, do you want me to take back the screen, or do you have?
All right, derailing you,
Well, let's yes, let's do that.
Okay, all right. Because we do have some poll questions that we're going to get to right before the Q&A. So these are just, again, kind of recapturing the slide, or what Steve just discussed. Again, you can see the new summary page presented here on the look back multiplier and the loss rate that Steve covered. Anything else, Steve, that you want to re-emphasize?
Nope.
We're good.
That's it for that.
This is a kind of a recap from last month's presentation, but again, anything you want to just touch on here?
Yeah, no, again, these were when we kind of reorganized the tool to focus on the actual accounting entries that we all have to deal with now that we're living in a CECL world, with the three completely separate ACLs, right? Your loan portfolio ACL, your held to maturity securities, and your unfunded commitments. And so the tool keeps those areas of ACL separately, because we need to think of them separately from a call report and from an accounting standpoint. I don't think we need to get into this. Was covered on the last coffee talk and on that separate little one-off webinar we did at the beginning, the week before our coffee talk last month, where we talked about this in depth. We can certainly give you, we share that separate presentation with you guys if you want to look back and refresh your memory on that. So I think we can scroll forward now if you'd like.
Great. Yeah. So then these are just the kind of the recap of those new three individual reserves.
That's the legacy layout. That's where we're going. These are the actual line items on the call report that we need to be filling out using this tool, right? The allowance for losses on our investment security. So this is for the HTM securities portfolio. The next one is the loan portfolio. I did them in order of the call report, right? Line 10 is the securities. Line 17 is the ACL on the loan portfolio. And on the liability side of the balance sheet, so again, not a contra asset, but just a standard liability account, which is brand new. This is brand new on this call report. It's never been on a call report before. Your kind of initially established allowance for credit losses on off-balance sheet credit exposures. I know we have some users who have always had an allowance for credit losses on the off-balance sheet stuff, off the unfunded, but since it was never on the call report, they always bundled it with their loan portfolio on their quote regular reserve. And if that's the case, then you're just you're going to do a couple adjustments so that you can reallocate it here where it needs to be going forward.
Great. Okay, then yeah, here again.
Yeah, and this is where this is again the newer layout of the tool that focuses on the loan portfolio ACL for the loan summary, and then the securities ACL for the securities, and then the unfunded commitments ACL for that. So to each his own bucket.
Correct. All right, great. Hey, we have a few poll questions we'd like to run by everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and start those now. We'll give each one of these just 30 to 45 seconds, but we are curious, and we thought you might be curious as well, you know, what the the answers to some of these questions. So the first one's regarding this first quarter allowance. Did your allowance in the first quarter change, increase, decrease, or stay the same? We'll just give this 30 or 45 seconds for everybody to answer.
And while we're here answering those guys, a couple of questions did come in asking, hey, should we create the 3 separate GLs? Right now, yes, go ahead and do that until we have additional guidance. Go ahead and create those. And there was a question on when to use individually assessed loans. There's no guidance again there. You kind of have to go with what you feel is works. Typically, I kind of recommend, hey, if you don't have a lot of losses in a segment, then that's maybe somewhere where you want to do it. And then maybe in places where you have a lot of historic losses, you might not want to do there as much.
So you can see the results, 63% of you saw an increase, 14 decreased, and 23% stayed the same. Okay, so on to the second question here regarding the Q factors. Did your Q factors change? Just increased, decreased, or stayed the same? So same thing, we'll just give this 30 to 45 seconds.
And this is on balance, right? The kind of a sum
Yes.
total of your Q factor
Yes.
adjustment, not obviously.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and end this one. So we saw about 63% of you said it stayed the same, 31% saw an increase, and 6% saw a decrease. So on to the next question. Thank you for participating in these. Just a question about charge-offs. You know, do you anticipate an increase in your charge-offs this year? Yes or no are the two choices here. So see where these shake out.
Yeah, definitely some economic headwinds right now.
Yeah, certainly, right?
I know we're kind of expecting things a certain way, but be good to see what y'all think or what you're seeing.
Yeah. Just give this another 5 seconds or so. Okay, not surprisingly, 70% of you do see an increase in your charge-offs this year. 30% no. All right, so thank you for sharing that. Increasing reserves. So again, do you anticipate further increasing your reserve over the course of 2023?
I think that day one might be skewing this one a little bit too, right? I mean,
Yeah, could.
if you really packed it in.
Well, I mean, yeah, if we did our day one adjustment anticipating additional
Bigger
losses,
increase.
right, throughout the course of this year, then you've already taken into account those concerns in your reserve, you know, as of the first quarter. So whether you expect that to continue to increase over the rest of the year.
Might depend, yeah.
Okay, so pretty similar. 65% of you do see your reserve increasing throughout the year, 35% no. And now the final question, and again, thank you all very much for participating in this. Oops, why is that one? What percentage of loans is your allowance? Let me see, why is that not launching here? Hold on. It is not giving me a chance to launch it. Yeah. Might not be able to do this one. Okay, let's try this. For whatever reason, it's not letting me launch this. Well, I apologize. That one is not going to, we're not going to be able to answer that one. Not sure why that didn't allow the launch. Well, let me try it. Oh, here we go. It was an operator error on my part. Here we go. What percentage of loans is your allowance? Less than 50 basis points, 50 to 1, 1 to 1.5, and greater than 1.5. So we'll just give this one a few seconds. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for joining in on the questions. And again, we'll make these part of the information that comes back to you with the email with the link to the recording and the slides.
Yep.
This one's kind of interesting too. I think typically we see a little bit less here than maybe on the bank side might be. So
yeah. Okay. We'll give this just a second or two. We'll go ahead and end this one. So we saw 32% of you are at below 50 basis points, 45 between 50 and 1%, 17% between 1 and 1.5, and 6% over 1.5. So again, thank you all very much for taking part in the polling questions today. So let me get rid of those. Okay, so all right, so we've got a number of questions. We got a question in from Greg around the capital account and the warnings, and I'm guessing that those warnings are potentially coming from the call report.
Yeah, I think the preparation software.
Yeah,
I'm
so
not familiar with them specifically.
yeah, exactly. We won't be necessarily able to speak to that, but I do believe based on what you're showing here that you're accounting for everything the way you do. Again, I can't speak to the historical warnings unless the fact they didn't like that the backdating of the day one entry, which is fine, but maybe the software doesn't like. So Greg, we may just want to take this specifically offline, just because like I said, it appears to me you're doing everything right. I just it may be more of a function of your reporting software more so than doing anything.
Yeah, I think we'd want to look into that in a little bit more depth, where some of these adjustments and where some of these entries are ending up.
Yeah, I would agree. So but it appears to me that you're handling all that correctly. So I'm not quite sure what the software that software is asking you for. All right, Jason, are there anything in the chat that we didn't cover?
There was a question on just unfunded commitments. You want to run through that real quick? We kind of discussed that, but
yeah, Steve, maybe bring up that unfunded commitment page if you don't mind. We can just kind of talk through that page real quick.
It's a new one for credit unions. So
yeah,
it is.
And again, it's important to recognize, right? These are loans that don't exist but could exist, right? So there's really a couple schools of thought here. Before I let Steve kind of talk you through our tool, right? You may determine the standard requires you to evaluate these. It doesn't necessarily necessitate a reserve, but it does necessitate an evaluation of those. And that's why we designed the tool the way we did, is to provide a way of potentially evaluating those reserves. You may just determine that you want to just apply some type of basis points to the entire batch of unfunded commitments. You may determine that it's a small amount at your credit union and they don't require a reserve, right? So everybody's going to be a little bit different, but I'll have Steve talk you through on what we felt like could be an effective way to evaluate these.
So you're probably already getting the feeling from what Sean said that there's not a lot of detailed guidance on exact. There's no one appropriate methodology. Well, for CECL in general, there certainly doesn't have. There's not a lot of detailed guidance on explicit ways to go about creating the reserve for the unfunded commitments and managing it. But our template here is our attempt to do so, and has been vetted by the regulators and the examiners. So we start by, we can get your total unfunded commitment values from the call report. So we start there. There is some segmentation. Of course, the segmentation is not the same as it is for your whole loan portfolio, That would be too simple. So they wanted to make it a little bit more challenging on us. So they gave us some different buckets, right? So these are the buckets that we have from the call reports, but you're starting with your total unfunded commitment. Then the first thought you have to decide is, all right, of all these, how much of these are unconditionally cancelable? Meaning that if you wanted to freeze that additional available credit, you're allowed as an institution to do so without having to jump through a bunch of legal and regulatory hoops. There is more than one definition of unconditionally cancelable, because that would also be too simple. The accounting definition is usually more strict. The regulatory definition is usually a bit more lenient when it comes to things like HELOCs. But a great example is credit card lines. Unused credit card lines are pretty much always unconditionally cancelable, right? At any given point in time, you or user can just freeze that account and take away the unfunded commitment, so to speak. So it is unconditionally cancelable. HELOCs can be sometimes. Overdraft commitments usually are, just because of the way the contracts are written. So it's a legal question, right? An accounting and a legal question. You'd want to look into the way the contracts are written for things like HELOCs to see if they meet the definition of unconditionally cancelable. The reason that's important is if your unfunded commitment, if you can cancel it, then you don't have to worry about it for CECL. You don't have to establish any reserve on your commitments that you can kind of negate, right, at will, or similar to at will. We back those out, and what's left is our net unfunded commitment. See, these are the amounts that we are committed to potentially lending in the future if the customers request it. And then we had to jump through a couple of hypothetical hoops here. Well, what's the likelihood this gets funded during a certain period of time? And then if it were to get funded, what kind of losses might we see on it? Well, luckily we have some default values or some information that can help you along this path. We have a good idea of what kind of loss rates you might see if they were to be funded, because we just did a study of your actual funded loan portfolio and what losses you've seen and expect to see moving forward. As far as probability of funding, that's another big black hole of guidance. They always punt on what are reasonable values to use. So we kind of dug into the literature, the call reports themselves, and in the risk-based capital guidelines that the NCUA puts out, they discuss what they call CCFs, or credit conversion factors. That's a concept that the regulators use to try to determine the likelihood that an unfunded commitment becomes funded in the future. And so by default, we have a 50% probability of funding for commercial loans and 10% for each of the other types. And again, there's lots of good footnotes down here that explain where that information is coming from, exactly where it's coming from. And so that's what we use by default, but that is just a starting point, right? We don't have a lot of detail on your unfunded commitments. In fact, we have almost none, very, very little from the call report. So these defaults get you going, but you're going to want to look at those commitments and consider them and modify most of these inputs to accurately reflect the ones that you have actually on the books, because we just don't have that much information on them. And the last step is, well, all right, if this is the amount that's not cancelable, I have to deal with it. This is how likely it is to be funded. Now, what kind of loss rate might we see if it were to be funded and become a loan? These values are, we footnote where they're coming from. We take your expected loss rates from the summary page, and we sort of pick the closest category, the closest segment from here to the segments that we have on the summary page, and do an annual, a single year annual expected loss rate calculation, and then multiply that by here. So we show how the math works, and that gets us to some sort of a expected future loss rate on this unfunded portfolio for the ones that are likely to be funded. So that's how we go about the process. Once you have a value there, that is your reserve right here. This is the reserve that you need for it. If you don't have any currently, like that first day, the first day adjustment, your first day adjustment would have to be establishing this account with this entire amount in it, right? And then all the day 2 and beyond accounting every quarter going forward, you'll simply redo this analysis. And if it comes out higher, you need a slight provision on your income statement to get it up higher, right? And vice versa. This is a little different from the way we adjust our loan portfolio reserve because we have charge-offs and recoveries and lots of things going into and out of the bucket, right? For loan loss reserves, we have provisions coming in, we have recoveries coming in, we have charge-offs and other adjustments and transfer stuff coming out. Whereas for the unfunded commitment reserve, this new liability bucket, the only thing coming in or out is our reevaluation of this analysis each quarter. That's it.
Steve, we had a couple of questions come through the chat as we were going through this. So
Sure.
is the assumption including Q factors on expected lifetime loss rate when the answer is yes?
Yes, the answer is yes. The expected loss rate that we have by default here is derived from the future loss rate on the summary, not just your historical, but your all in what I expect moving forward loss rate. It's not equal to it, but it's derived from it.
Derived from it, right. And then I think the next question is, how wide would the remaining commitment change on these types of products? I think the question is why we're using a 1-year warm. And I think the answer to that is typically lines of credit like these you would have with your members typically would be annually renewable. And so because they are, any type of line like this is a drag on capital, right? You are committing capital to an unfunded line. So most institutions always want to evaluate those annually. And so that's why we treat them as a 1-year warm, because the reality is that they could become permanent financing, but they also would have a chance to essentially reevaluate these credits on a yearly basis.
For what period of time are you committed to extending this additional credit? Are you legally committed? If there's language, which there usually is, which say that we can at least either renew it or reconsider it on an annual basis, then the amount of time that you are legally committed to extending this credit is that 1 year. So that's why it's not quite as standard as the math of, just the warm math. What's our contractual expiration for this commitment? Is it renewable annually? Then fine, it's just 1 year.
Yeah. The next question came in is, where in the chart of accounts would you add the allowance for off-balance sheet credit exposure? So 2 questions here, really. One, certainly in the call report, it's a separate line item in other liabilities. And so again, depending on how you set up your GL, it would be another liability section of your GL.
Thanks, Sue.
Yep. And thanks, Sue, for providing that as well. Okay, so all right. And then
one thing before we bail too, and again, this is kind of, you can review this, but at the end of the day, you can also decide, well, we don't need anything here. Same thing for held to maturity securities. Most of y'all are asking those same questions. Do we need to have anything for that? In most cases, no.
Yeah,
if you did, I don't think you would even need to either there, right? It's still
we did a poll on that a couple months ago, and
95% of you don't have
95% and we've seen that in the data as well coming through, that the vast majority of you are not going to have any reserve. It's going to be a negligible or zero reserve on the held to maturity securities. Most of you will probably have some sort of a reserve on the unfunded commitments, although it should be pretty small. If it's a large percentage of your overall reserve, that's because you do a lot of business in unfunded commitments in segments where you've had a lot of losses, or something else odd is going on, that you can certainly reach out to us and we can take a look to double check it, put a set of eyeballs on it for you.
Yeah, and again, I think one of the reasons for most these won't be significant is these are a drag on capital. So a lot of institutions don't want to have a ton of commitments if they're not going to be utilized. Secondly, they aren't loans yet, right? So it's hard to really think about a loss on something that doesn't exist yet. And with the short window, they just, for most of you, is not going to be a terribly material number. But I think the important thing to note, right, both with the unfunded commitments and the HTM securities, is again, you're not necessitated to have a reserve for these, right? You're necessitated to evaluate if you need a reserve for these. And so again, we have advocated as a best practice to make sure you set up the accounts to essentially demonstrate to third parties that you recognize you need to be doing this, even if no reserve is determined to be necessary. So again, I would establish those accounts, evaluate these through the tool, and then make your determination on whether there's actually a reserve to be established.
Yeah.
For the unfunded commitments, like Steve touched on, right, for most of you, it won't be a large number, so it's probably not terribly meaningful. So if you have something in there, is probably great. And then 95% of you from previous presentations don't have HTM securities that have credit risk, right? That's what
Yeah.
we're really focused on, is credit risk, not interest rate risk, credit risk. And most of you are typically only holding things that have some type of guarantee, whether it's a CD, whether it's an agency, a treasury, a government sponsored mortgage back, all of
Yeah.
which have some type of credit enhancement or guarantee.
And we've seen even on the commercial bank side, which can tend to have somewhat more extensive or elaborate securities portfolios, that almost 85 to 90% of them are finding no reserve for their CECL reserve for their securities portfolio.
For some of our larger credit unions that may have things outside of that, Sean, do you think maybe like we could help assess risk with IntelliCredit or something like that, or is there a process that we could help evaluate the risk on those that might need a reserve?
Well, so on the securities, Jason, is that what you're asking? Yeah, so the securities are a little bit more dicier, right? Because again, if it depends on what type of security it is, right? So if it's a piece of corporate, a corporate bond or something like that, right, then you should be able to get research, from whomever your securities provider was who sold that to you. There's obviously it'll have a S&P rating or a Moody's rating. Typically, you're able to get reports from them that will show directional changes if applicable to those, but at least you'll get their guidance on what they determine to be the risk in that security. If it's something other than like a private credit or a muni issue or something like that, again, anybody who you bought those from, or a private label, ABS, MBS or ABS, those may need something, right? And so again, they are going to have private ratings, but I would go first to whoever sold that to you, right? Because they should have made you aware of what type of credit risk might be involved in that security before you bought it. And so then I would ask them first, is there something we could do potentially, Jason? But again, since these are securities, I think I would start with whoever sold you that security and ask them for additional information.
Perfect.
Okay, Steve, should I take back the screen?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. All right, so let's get into some of the other Q&A questions that we have received. So a lot of the questions we've gotten this month is around timing, particularly since you're filing your call reports now. When should I complete my allowance? If you can do it before the quarter, I think that's great, right? In the tool, anything you see in blue, you can update your quarterly balances for. So again, Steve, maybe you take it back just to show this, right? Because this is important. Even though the loss history and all that might be a quarter behind, you can update your current balances whenever you want. And so I think that's important, because if you want to this weekend do your 331s, you're gonna have those quarter end balances for your call report. All you'll need to do is simply update your loan balances in column D. And now you can prepare this prior to filing your call report.
Yeah.
So it's again your choice, but you have the ability to update our tool to address
do it as of any point in time that you want.
Yeah.
The question becomes, and the confusion becomes, well, all of the data on here is not updated for 331. So how can I calculate a reserve as of 331 when some of the historical data when the 331 doesn't exist, right? For peer data or for call reports that haven't been filed yet. And the answer to that question is, your reserve calculation can be as of any point in time. Some of the information that you're using in your for your historical loss rates, right? From what history would suggest your reserve needs to be before we adjust that for Q factors, right? The historical part A. That can be based upon any period of time that we think is appropriate to give us an idea of lifetime loss rates. If we don't have the most recent quarter available yet, but we have 3 years worth of losses, even if those losses end as of a couple months ago, and we have 3 years worth of peer data to help us guide us on qualitative factor adjustments. There's always going to be a lag in the historical data that's available, and when that is as of, between that and any analysis, whether it's looking at economic data, there's always going to be somewhat of a lag. The things that need to be current as of the date of the analysis or calculation should be your loan portfolio balances, right? If you're doing a reserve as of March 15th, you want loan balances as of March 15th. If you're using historical data that ends at 12/31, as long as you think that is still relevant and appropriate, then that's our historical context. If anything big has happened between 12/31 and March 13th, when you're actually your as of date, you have a Q factor adjustment for current conditions, right? Changes in the current environment. If anything has fallen off a cliff in the last month, that's not reflected in your small lag in historical, you reflect that in, you adjust that with a qualitative factor adjustment. So there's always a lag. The regulators are aware of it. The examiners are aware of it. We can do certain things to minimize that lag where possible, but it's always going to exist to some extent. And that does not limit when you run the tool or how often or what date you run it as of.
Yeah, and Greg, to your question, do we feel it'll become a problem that the loss history isn't able to be updated monthly? No, because again, as Steve touched on two things. One, the loss history are going to tend to be longer periods of time anyway, right? So 1 quarter of data is not going to dramatically shift that. And if it is such a big number that it would shift it, you can address it through the Q factors or an individually assessed loan, right? So like we're getting, it's a little bit of semantics, but it's just not going to move the needle. And if it is going to move the needle, you still have the ability to address it through the tool. Right?
If you've got a 7-year warm on your mortgage portfolio and you're using a look back period that's also 7 years, now that you can do that separately, you've got 28 quarters worth of historical data defining your lifetime historical loss rate, right? Let's say it's 5 basis points a year for 7 years. That's 35 basis points lifetime loss rate. What happens in 1 quarter if we miss that most recent quarter? Well, then we have 28 of the last 29 quarters available in that data. If that 29th quarter, that most recent one that's not part of the history, saw a huge spike, well, that's where we have a qualitative factor adjustment, because Q factors are defined as the reasons why current and future conditions might be different than long-term historical trends. So if you had a huge spike in the last 60 days, that's a change in the current condition, right? That's a significant, meaningful change in your current situation. So that's a Q factor adjustment.
Yeah, and I would just add too, I think it does bring into, it's a good question because it does bring into light another point that I think about CECL, which is part of the design is to make those losses hang around longer, right? And by looking at these longer periods of time. So I think the real issue with charge-offs going forward is they're just going to hang around a lot longer, in your historicals potentially than in the past, right? And so I think as we move forward, more of our reserve will be kind of defended or supported by our actual net charge-offs and probably less on Q factors because we will look at potentially longer.
But it's a double-edged sword, right? During this part of the economic cycle where we've had benign or low loss rates for a while, you're like, oh, those losses from 7 years ago are still hanging around. Well, 5 years from now, when losses may be a lot higher than they are now, you'll be saying, oh, thank God, those lack of losses from 7 years ago are still hanging around. So it smooths the trend. The whole concept of CECL was to try to get a better feel for cyclical reserves, right? Reserves as we move through the business cycle of higher loss environments and lower loss environments. It should, in the long run, be smoothing out these spikes. So you're already taking into account losses, even if you haven't seen them recently because you did a long time ago. And so when those spikes happen, a bad economy, you've already reserved appropriately for some of those increases that you're going to see. So you won't necessarily have to see a huge change in your ACL, in your CECL reserve when charge-offs come up, because you've already taken into account historical trends in charge-offs when they were higher, right? So it should be a smoothing, leveling concept over the long run. That was their idea.
Great, thanks, Steve. So hopefully, again, hopefully that helped kind of with the timing and just updating if you want to do it monthly, et cetera. So again, these are some questions we've certainly gotten over the last month about recommendations about one provision account or three separate accounts. I think again, our recommendation is to have three separate reserves. That's what the call report's calling for. That's what the guidance is really calling for. Recommendations about how you set the GL up on your books. Again, everybody's going to be a little bit different with that, but again, the important part is that the HTM is a contra account. The new unfunded commitments is a new general liability account. So wherever you have those structured on your GL is probably the most makes the most sense. So there's not really a universal place necessarily, other than just kind of however your GL is structured. Steve, Jason, David, anything you guys going to add to anything here?
Yep. There.
Yeah, so again, just kind of this was a call report question. I wasn't completely sure, so I just wanted to show it. But essentially, yeah, I mean, when you set up if you were doing the day one and you were taking this out of capital, this would be kind of how that would work. Again, since this was a new establishment, if you did the day one, right? Just moving forward, provisioning for any of these, you'll treat just like you would a normal provision. Again, gentlemen, anything you guys want to add here?
Nope, it's a simpler bucket, right? It just comes, money goes from the provision to the unfunded commitments liability back and forth, just as you reevaluate how much you need. You don't also have charge-offs, recoveries, or anything like that going through there.
So we've gotten naturally continue to get questions on the WARMs. Again, I think a lot of these are just really good fine-tuning types of questions. One, how often do I need to update them? Is every 6 months okay? I'll let everybody else take a shot at this, but my feeling on this one, right, is I think eventually that will be the case. I think for the first few quarters, I think you want to do them quarterly so you can demonstrate to a third party that you can show that they don't change that much. But I suspect we'll get to a point where 6 months is quite okay. Gentlemen, anything you guys want to add there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've response to the second question there. So the way our WARM estimator is structured now, we give you some options in WARM methodology to choose, and it's really about where you want to be on the spectrum of more conservative versus more aggressive. And if you have a reason to believe, if you have a particular segment of your portfolio where there isn't very much amortization, and you want to use a WARM methodology just for that segment where that doesn't take into account amortization as a universal assumption, that's fine. I would say that this is points for paper. If you're choosing different ways of calculating WARM from our tool based upon the segment, you just need to have a reasonable explanation for why you're doing that. So it doesn't look like you're just picking the better one or the worse one, right? As long as you have some explanation for why that is reasonable and makes sense, then you should be fine. Choosing a different methodology for your WARM for the same segment for each quarter, you're going to have a really good reason as to why you think you should be doing it a different way for the same segment quarter after quarter. I don't see a lot of good reasons for that, but there's a lot of credit unions out there, so I'm sure somewhere there's a good reasonable reason to do that. It could be because of a big change in you've made an acquisition and now you have a bunch of new loans on the books that are different. They're the same segment, but they act differently from, there's always reasons. And then why can't we, so that should say 13 years. Why can't we input a WARM over 13 years? That was, all right, when we initially designed the tool, we only had 10 years of data. And now we've got more like 15 years worth of data. And now, as I just pointed out, as of this Monday, you now have additional flexibility in breaking that automatic link between the look back period and the WARM if you so desire. So we're going to be completely removing the WARM limitation in the next week or so here. We just need to make sure that it works properly with the update to the tool. However, I do feel the need to say that if you're calculating warms that are significantly more than 13 years, you should be looking at your methodology and how you're doing it, because after taking into account things like prepayments and amortization assumptions, there aren't very many loans, portfolio segments that are going to have remaining maturity adjusted
Over
for
13 years, yeah.
amortization and prepayments of over 13 years. So look carefully at it.
Yeah. Okay. Next are just some questions we've gotten on prepayments and the unfunded commitments. Which prepayment suggestion should I use? Again, I think this really is really the culture of your credit union, right? I mean, I think there's some of you who want a more conservative approach to the reserve, some want a more aggressive approach. The prepayment suggestions, again, directionally, any type of prepayment assumption is going to lower your WARM. No prepayment assumption is going to increase your WARM, because it won't. There is no prepayment assumption. So it's really, there's no right or wrong answer. It's really whatever fits best with your kind of philosophy or culture around the reserve.
And what data you have available. Most credit unions can't even begin to calculate the prepayment speed. So, I mean.
And even if you had the historical data to accurately calculate do a prepayment study based upon your history, that's only the first piece of the puzzle. They're asking for a prepayment assumption moving forward. So you'd still have to have an explanation for why you think that what your historical calculation is still accurate in the future. So the more granular you get with these calculations, the more defense, the more additional data, the more questions they're going to ask. So you kind of open up a can of worms, so to speak, when you try to get too granular on some of this in most cases, but it depends on, what obviously your auditors and examiners are comfortable with as well. The NCUA has some good data here now. The NCUA is the only regulatory body that has any decent data on prepayment assumptions at the segment level. So we were very pleased when, I believe it was last October, November, when they first came out with some of this. So I don't think you can go wrong with starting with what the NCUA has put out there. They did that specifically to help you guys use the WARM method for CECL. So it's a good starting point. And if it's too conservative or aggressive, modify as needed and then have a reason for it.
Document.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jason.
Document everything.
Yep. Document everything. Where can I find unfunded commitments if they're unconditionally cancelable? Again, that's typically going to be found in your note agreements. So that is typically where that kind of provision would reside. Adjusting the annual expected loss. Absolutely, you can adjust it. Do you have to? No. It's really, again, if you just want to deviate from the, kind of the format that we've established for you. But we certainly have institutions who are manually adjusting that based on their own expectations.
Yeah, because we don't have any information on the individual loans. We're making our best guess as to what, it's apples to oranges, the segmentation a little bit. So we're taking a balance sheet loan portfolio segment and applying it to an unfunded commitment segment, which is similar, but not identical. So it's just really a starting point for you guys. But if you're looking for the unconditionally cancelable stuff, credit card lines, yes, I'm comfortable saying pretty much yes. HELOCs, very iffy, very questionable. And overdrafts,
probably.
usually yes.
Try to your checking counts, right?
Yeah,
shut those off.
You or the customer. You can cancel one of those accounts. The customer can cancel one of those accounts. You don't need to jump through a bunch of hoops to do it. So I would say pretty much yes to those. Always yes to credit cards, and to the HELOCs.
Yeah. Questions on Q factors. What Q factors can I use? How much is too much or enough too much? Again, these are all going to be unique to your institution. You can use as many or as few Q factors. I think the overriding, premise here again is, as Steve touched on, the point of a Q factor is to capture and modify anything that's not being represented in your historical losses, right? So it can be positive, it can be negative, but I always say, whatever keeps you up at night or however you feel about your portfolio, because you know it better really than anybody else. So I think these are all unique to every institution, but I would embrace what you've been doing and just, again, just capture how you're feeling about, your portfolio.
This doesn't have to be remaking the wheel from scratch, right? Just CECL did not the new accounting standard for CECL did not say that the types of Q factors you've been using are not appropriate anymore. It doesn't speak to that at all. The same types of adjustments for certain economic local things going on in your environment, the same types of factors you would have used in the past, if they were acceptable by your auditors and your examiners, should still remain acceptable under CECL. So it's really just a magnitude question, right? If I'm making the same types of adjustments, same categories of adjustments, how much of an adjustment should I be making when I'm considering the fact that this adjustment is for the remaining life of the portfolio, right? Not just like over the next couple months or something. So you want to think about that, but it's we hate saying that, it's easy for us to say it's unique for each institution, but you can't get around that fact when it comes to Q factors.
Yeah.
No, Steve, would you lean more towards Q factors rather than individually assessed loans?
I think individually assessed loans should have a high threshold to begin with. Since we're not getting really detailed, we can't fall back on the old TDR or impairment standard for exactly when a loan needs to be individually assessed. We had a very specific accounting principles around when a specific reserve needs to be set up based upon that particular loan. The concept is still there, but the guidelines, the old guidelines are no longer in effect, right? The general FAS 5 and FAS 114 ceased to exist, and they have been replaced by the CECL standard. So, any loan that had ever been past due, or, you might have considered becoming a TDR years in the past, I don't think that's a good threshold to be stripping it out of culling it from the herd and individually assessing it with all that additional work and documentation. I think it should be for loans that have serious problems and you think will not perform at all like the rest of the bucket moving forward.
Great. Next on the HTMs, again, the guidance requires that we evaluate these. Do I need a GL count? It's always going to be 0. I would say yes, just again to acknowledge the fact that you recognize that it is a requirement. And then, going about calculating the reserve, again, for any security that you have that has some type of credit risk, your securities dealer should be able to provide you with research reports or even historical assessments of what kind of charge-off activity has occurred or loss of principal has occurred with, based on a rating of those securities. So those are probably the first places to start.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, anything else to add there before we move to the next slide? I know we're pushing past an hour here, so I don't want to go much beyond where we are. So some loan questions, historical loan skew my numbers. How can I best account for it?
What do you think makes the most sense, right? What do you want to try to remove it from? Do you want to try to use a look back period that doesn't include that? We don't give you the flexibility to go into your historical details and simply delete the existence of a historical charge off in the historical columns, right? Those are factual balances that were, unless you go and refile a call report and remove it, right? At that point, it'll be removed from the historical experience. But it's really just, do I think a look back period that doesn't include that historical loss, right, is more reflective of what I expect moving forward? That's removing it from history, or at least the history you're using. Or I might say, listen, I'm not trying to hide this. I don't want them to think I'm trying to hide it. So I'll let it show in the historical and I'll make a Q factor adjustment saying, listen, 80 basis points of this 100 basis points over the last 5 years was one credit. This was a situation. It was very non-recurring in nature. It was a wacky relationship. We've gotten out of it. We don't expect anything like that in the future. Boom, negative Q factor adjustment to pull it out of your future expectations while not hiding the fact that it is part of your history. That's usually the track I would suggest.
I've had some add this as well. If it's the death of a member, if that caused a charge off. There was another situation last week where I talked to somebody that type of auto loan, whether it be indirect or some type of loan that they're no longer doing, made those adjustments for it as well.
That's
that's a portfolio. That's one of the Q factor adjustments that's already it's kind of pre-filled in there. There's a column for changes in the structure of that segment, right? Changes in the population of loans within the segment.
The question on the adjustment and exclusion column, right? Again, that can be for cash secured loans or CD secured loans.
Share
Further,
security is big, yeah.
yeah, further, granularity within a portfolio. So that's again, they're just for flexibility.
SBA, ADA
yeah,
guarantees,
yeah.
any guaranteed, any portion of the balances that are the guaranteed portion, right? You're not subtracting out the whole loan that has a 20% guarantee. You're subtracting out the 20% guarantee, right?
Yeah.
That's the portion that you don't want to apply a future expected loss rate to.
Documented due diligence, again, it's there for your use. You can be as specific or as general as you want to. You may just prefer to do your own narrative and upload that as to the attachments. We do have our SOC 1, available. We don't believe it's a type 2 is necessary because we're not dealing in any PII, any personal information. Everything we're doing is using, talking to our auditors, the SOC 1 type 1 was all they suggested. All right, so I think we've gotten to the end of this. Certainly any final questions or chats, please submit those. Thank you all to everybody for joining today. We will be back in a couple of weeks, a little shorter window here with our coffee talk in May. Certainly appreciate you joining us today. Hopefully you'll join us again next month. Steve, David, Jason, anything to add or close with before we let
I had one quick question here.
Yep.
So it was concerning page 22 of the call report. If I put in my one-time adjustments to undivided earnings that we made on January 1st, it then adds that back to my net worth, and that figure and my ratio are off for my actual March 31st figures. So they're not opting to make the quarterly adjustments. They just took the one-time hit and moved on from there. I'm not even sure.
Can we say that again? Sorry.
Question is concerning page 22 on the call report. If I put in my one-time adjustment to undivided earnings that we made on January 1st, it then adds that back to my net worth, and that figure, my ratio are off my actual March 31st figures. Not sure.
I'd have to follow.
Is there? Yeah,
I'm trying to visualize it all.
Can you ask this? So
when you make it right, that the one time they're keeping track of the one-time adjustment because they're using it to help you recalculate your net worth ratios, and that is something that is phased in over time if you have a shortfall, right? If you had a one-time negative adjustment, they're going to phase the effect of that in for your net worth ratio calculation over 12 quarters. So, but that number should never change. That's a one-time entry, right? It's in the first quarter, you're making a day one adjustment. That day one adjustment is historical. It will never change. It has to stay the same because you have to take 1/12 of it each quarter to add back for calculating your net worth ratio properly over this 3-year phase in. I know that was a disgustingly long and convoluted sentence, but that's the way it's supposed to work. So that day one thing is a one time. That number shouldn't change. Maybe they just have to work on how they explain it in the, I haven't read the instructions again for the first quarter, but from day 2 on, that value, how much of that is factored into your net worth calculation will change each quarter for 12 quarters. But what the starting point of that calculation is still that one-time historical non-changing value. So I don't know if they do the phase, if they make you do the 1/12 phase in each quarter and recalculate it on there, which would be kind of silly, or whether they're doing that automatically. I'd have to look into the instructions.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Any final comments before we let everybody go this weekend?
Now, this is first chance you all got to get all 4 of us together in one room. Thank you guys for all the questions. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you
Great
guys are doing
questions,
great.
man. Thanks.
Yeah, y'all are all doing awesome. Just keep on. Y'all are doing great.
Fantastic. Again, thanks to David, Jason, Steve for joining us today. Thanks to all of you attending. Let us know if we didn't answer your questions. Just reach out to us. We'll try to get them answered, and then look early next week for a kind of a recap with a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. And again, we'll hopefully have some additional information in there for you as well. So have a great weekend. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you again in May.
Thanks, everyone.
You everyone.